I want you to meet, in case you have not, Bob Shacochis. He's the winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize 2014 Award in Fiction for The Woman Who Lost Her Soul. A Pulitzer Prize finalist, the book was selected as the best book of the year by the Washington Post, NPR, Amazon.com, and others. Wow. He is also the author of award-winning short story collections, Easy in the Islands, The Next New World, as well as the novel Swimming in the Volcano, a finalist for the National Book Award, and The Immaculate Invasion, a work of literary reportage that was a finalist for the New Yorker Book Award for Best Nonfiction of the Year. His op-ed articles on the U.S. military and Haiti and Florida politics. Now that'll get you. Florida politics. I want to talk about serious combat. Now have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. We're delighted to have him here. This is Bob Shacochis.
Oh gosh, here I am again on this podium in Dayton. Ever since I landed on Friday, I've been either telling myself or anybody who would listen what an honor it is to be invited to Dayton. I don't know. Gloria Steinemann's from New York City, so she's not as easily impressed as I am, but she's been doing this to me too. But it truly is an honor. I'm so happy to be invited back, and I want to say something I said last year, and Sharon Rabb is proof, as is Gloria Steinemann, that one person with a vision can become many people, and that vision can become a reality, and that reality can be world-changing. And Sharon, you've done that. Of course, Gloria has too. But and like I said last year, tonight we are all Sharon Rabb. What you created was extraordinary, and I know you didn't do it alone, but it was your vision. And then you found a lot of people to help you. And this event is extraordinary. And so I want everybody to make a vow, including the very young Gloria Steinemann, that 10 years from now, we'll all come back for the 20th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Award. So I'm here to introduce Josh Weil and his great book, The Great Glass Sea. Josh already knows that I'm stealing 10 seconds from him to say something very short about Phil Donahue. This is my opportunity to do it in public, and I want to do it. Phil Donahue was fired by MSNBC in 2003 for opposing the intervention in Iraq. Mr. Donahue, you stood up to defend our country from this madness. The Republicans didn't, and the Democrats didn't, and the independents did not, and the media did not. But you, sir, did, in a most public way, and got kicked in the teeth for it. And I want to say thank you for your service. Josh, it's not often that one can say truthfully about a book that a book is not like any other book, wrote the novelist Sigrid Nunez in praise of Josh Weil's The Great Glass Sea. Here's a book that's not like any other book. And that assessment by Nunez is so correct that it's impossible to place Weil in any one tradition of novel writing, or to say he's following in the footsteps of this master or that master, although it's not difficult to see some of the fraternal radiance of John Steinbeck's work in Josh's work, or some of Salman Rushdie's exuberant inventiveness. But the fact remains that the Great Glass Sea is one of a kind and spectacular in its originality. I had to smile reading the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's review of the Great Glass Sea, which said, quote, "If complex literary novels really are done for, Josh Weil must have missed the text message." And I thought to myself, that line would never have been written if the Journal-Constitution's reviewer had been paying attention this past decade to the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, perhaps the most meaningful literary award series in the nation, honoring intention and vision, both art and substance, craft and sensibility, literature and the purpose of literature, which is to hold ourselves accountable for who we are in a way the courtroom simply cannot. Because the fullness of human accountability can only be experienced in the relentless intimacy of literature. Complex literary novels are not done for, no more than the idea and the reality of magnificent architecture, like this building, is done for. And if you want to visualize Josh Weil's splendidly ambitious imagination, try out this image, the fabled iconic cathedral in Moscow's Red Square, St. Basil's, commissioned by the 16th century Tsar Ivan the Terrible, a building shaped as the flames, intentionally shaped as the flames of a bonfire reaching into the sky, a design that has no analog in Russian history, in Russian architecture. My point being here is the dazzling capacity of Weil's imagination. Although such things can't really be quantified, Josh Weil, I mean to say, is the uncommon type of writer who builds the brainpower equivalent of cathedrals and skyscrapers in his head, down to the most esoteric details, the plumbing and the wiring, not just the superstructure. It's not content to erect a tent on the shores of Lake Placid or a 4-bedroom split level in the suburbs, both of which are quite habitable and useful, but whose aspirations by nature are not heavenward, which is to say inspirational. In this novel, as in our lives, the past is or can be so heart-grippingly beautiful because it owns what we love, what we each love. It's where what you love mostly comes from once you're an adult, unless you had an early life of wretchedness and abuse. But either way, the past is the one place you cannot get stuck, because getting stuck there will likely paralyze the future, or at least hinder the possibility contained within the future. What you love in life, the Great Glass Sea reminds us, flows from and through the past into the blessing of the moment, informing and shaping the present, and flows onward to the hope and yearning of tomorrow. Yet when what was joined harmoniously in the past is broken in the present, that brokenness creates a clear and present danger to the most fundamental things: the love between brothers, between siblings, between parents and children, between neighbors, between countrymen. When one brother wants to live in the past and one wants to live in the future, neither lives in the present, and that's a problem that is universal. The two desires: let's keep it the old way, let's do it the new way, become irreconcilable. And you know that in America today. Even though Josh has set his novel in Russia, it speaks so much to America today. The friction between them grinds away at peace and security and the common good. Never didactic, but in the guise of compelling storytelling, The Great Glass Sea urges us to ask, how willing are we to be oppressed by prosperity? When we maximize worker productivity and corporate profit, what is it we as a species are accomplishing exactly? How much of our time is our own? Is perpetual growth a virtue, a necessity, or a cancer? When it's in our body, we call it a cancer. Are we on the right path to make the world a better place? Is it just enough to not make the world a worse place? That grinding against peace is amplified and accelerated by the inevitable change that shudders across the earth year after year, generation after generation. One brother says, "I will cling to my soul, even if it defies and threatens the change." The other brother, his twin, says, "I will swear allegiance to the change, even if it threatens my soul." This then is the profound thematic universe of The Great Glass Sea. And what I think you will find extraordinary about the dramatization of this theme is not just the imaginative brilliance of the author, or the marvelous characters and Russian landscapes and legends he brings into our lives, but the penetrating gentleness and tenderness and humanity of his sensibility, a sensibility that generates, in the face of human conflict, beauty and wonder throughout the sweep of the novel, down to the purity of its single, lovely, lush, and utterly gorgeous sentences. Josh.
God, Bob, that was incredible. You said that it didn't appear my book followed in the footsteps of anyone, but I'm following in your footsteps up here, and it's a huge honor. I want to thank a few people. Sharon Rabb, of course. This is an amazing thing to put on, amazing thing that you all do here. Also the first readers and the final judges. The entire community here in Dayton, you've been so welcoming, but more than that, you've been inspiring. And that's rare in such a large gathering of people. I want to thank my wife, Jen, who makes so much of my life worth living, and who read more drafts of this damn book than anybody should have ever had to. And finally, my stepdaughter, Sadie, who at 12 years old reminds me every time she curls up with a book for 6, 7, 10 hours at a time, of the all-consuming wonder that a story can conjure, which at its heart is so much of why I write. I wish both of them could be here tonight. They can't. They're home taking care of our baby, who's 11 months old and every bit as all-consuming as a great book. Though at 3 and 4 and 5 in the morning, less apt to inspire wonder. Raising a child, tending a family, it's easy for me to turn inward, to get swept up in that self-contained, tightly focused world, but there's nothing to snap you out of that like being asked to speak at something like this. I was sitting at my writing desk in an old camper trailer down by Deer Creek thinking about what I'd want to say, thinking about the writers who'd received this award before me, feeling honestly pretty terrified. Not just because so many of those writers are my literary heroes, but because many of them wrote directly about matters of peace or injustice in ways that I didn't think I did. I've never really considered myself a political writer. I don't approach stories with the intent to affect some societal change. Writing The Great Glass Sea, I didn't think of it as a political novel, but in part because of this award, because of the gift it's given me of looking at my work from a new angle, I've come to understand that it is a political novel. I am a political writer. Because, and I believe this as strongly as I do anything about literature, for a piece of writing to be worth that name, literature, it must raise in the reader a sharpened consciousness, cause some reckoning with the vital questions of life, complicate or clarify ideas in a way profound enough to leave the reader changed. And how can that not speak to what we see happening in the world each day? How can that not affect the way we feel about it, and hopefully sometimes the actions we as citizens of the world take? When I was working on this novel, I found myself contemplating this question of worth a lot. What makes literature worth the name? What makes a novel worth the 3 or 4, nearly 500 pages that mine became? And I think that for me, this is a big part of the answer. This demand that a story speak to a reader in such a way that it might change the way she relates to some aspect of life significant enough to impact the lives of others. I so admire writers who approach this directly, dissidents and activists. I'm talking about fiction writers here, nonfiction writers, including maybe especially those honored tonight, from Gloria to Brian to Jeff, are in a whole different category, something closer in my mind to saints. But these fiction writers who approach matters of justice and peace directly, I admire who they are, what they do. I think they're probably better people than writers like me. But I believe that both our kinds of fiction draws its powers, or at least I hope mine tries to, from the same subtle magic, the way that growing intimate with a character can clarify some equally intimate part of the reader's self, and in reflecting that self back, make the other inescapably familiar, whether that other is a person or a culture or a concept or a political point. The Great Glass Sea was, for me, at heart, an intimate story about the love between brothers, rooted in my own relationship with my own brother. But as I wrestled with this idea of worth, the troubles that threatened to tear my characters apart began to speak to something larger. Hitchhiking through post-communist Slovakia, I listened to a woman bemoan her factory-packaged bread, reminiscing about how as a girl, each week she had accompanied her mother and all their neighbors to the same communal kitchen where they'd baked loaves together. In Russia, a school teacher told me when she'd first moved into her flat before the Soviet Union fell, if anyone baked a cake, all the families in the building would drop by, each person eating a thin sliver, sharing their camaraderie late into the night, 2, 3 in the morning. These days, she never sees her neighbors. She doesn't even know their names. Though now there is enough money for each family to buy its own store-bought cake. Not that most families have time anymore to sit around and celebrate. We live like animals now, another Russian woman said, always worrying about where we'll get the next meal, how long we'll have a roof over our heads. They didn't wish the old system back, the shortages and secrecy and squelched freedoms that the very dissident writers I admire had fought against. But the more I listened, the more I realized what they regretted were the same things I had begun to question back home. What had happened to the leisure time that John Maynard Keynes once predicted would dominate Western workers' lives? Why, if American workers were twice as productive, made twice as much stuff as half a century before, were they working so many more hours? When had the idea of laboring itself become a virtue? What had this fetishization of work led to? Who had it enriched? Before long, I was writing a novel that wrestled with questions of what it meant to lead a good life, how life might lead someone away from what they truly wanted, of who decided what was worthwhile to spend a day, of what choices people around the world were making without recognizing they were making choices at all. That's pretty political stuff. Now, at the risk of sounding like I sit in my writing trailer quaking in fear all day, this too scared me, as much as it did to write about a love that peeled open my own love for my own brother. But that's another thing I believe about literature. It should scare us, both writer and reader. To delve into the uncomfortable corners of the heart, the dangerous crevices of the mind, to shine a light on places where we don't want to look or don't bother to or simply can't, to make us. That too is part of what makes it worth it. I'd bet every writer who stood up here wrote at some point out of or into that kind of fear. And I know none of it would matter without readers who are willing to go there too. God knows today our world is full of escapes, beach reads and blockbusters and videos that people post of cats. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we all need a break, but that's not why we're here. And by here, I mean here, the big here, but I also mean here in this room. So I want to say one more thank you, and that's to all of you for supporting this organization, because its support for writing that reaches for something that's worth it helps writers face the next fear, embrace the responsibility that comes with the chance to cast the kind of spell that I see sweep over my stepdaughter when she reads. I know I feel that, the encouragement to write the next thing from that dangerous place, to make it something that my son someday might read and know this is what his father felt strongly enough about to think it worth a book. And for that, I cannot thank you all enough. Thank you.